Very pleased today to have all of you here and to have our partners in the public lands agencies with us. Thank you very much to all. So I'll give a little bit of a lay of the land at what we're planning to do, and then I'll introduce our panelists, and we'll carry it on from there. So I probably can stand. Can you guys hear me if I don't do this thing? Yeah? Is it okay in the back? Can you hear me all right in the back? Okay, great. It's like, she's like, come see, come saw. So I'll do this then after all. All right, so we have an hour, and I've asked our panelists to try to keep their presentations to about 10 to 15 minutes each. So we should have, at the end of it, hopefully about 10 minutes Q&A, right, of large group Q&A. And then there's nothing happening in this room after this. And actually, I think there are other rooms we'll be able to get into as well. And I've asked these guys if they could stay, linger. We'd like to break into small groups. If you'd like to have a small group discussion with the BLM, the Forest Service, or the National Park Service recreation leads, then that's what we're going to do at that point. So I'm happy to run beers to keep you going after we hit that 5 o'clock.
Not authorized.
This is on camera, but that won't be. So enjoy. All right, everybody. Very pleased to have today Kevin Oliver, the BLM Recreation and Visitor Services Program District Chief, Program Division Chief, all the way from Salt Lake City. Ben Johnson, the U.S. Forest Service National Recreation Special Uses Program Manager. And last but not least, Kurt Rausch, the National Park Service Commercial Services Program Chief. You guys have been participating in our conversations for a long time. We really value your time and attention to this community. We have frequent uncertainty and questions, so it's always nice to have some clarifying guidance and insight from all of you. So without further ado, I'm happy to hand this over, and we are going to begin with the National Park Service. Kurt Rausch is going to kick us off. Take it, Luke.
Everyone, it's great to be here. I don't know if anybody noticed that when we first started, several of us actually moved furniture, demonstrating that we too have calluses on our hands from doing stuff. It's not always office work. So super excited to be here and chat with all of you. And this actually is a pretty big group compared to some meetings that we've had, particularly knowing that beer is getting served pretty soon. So thank you for your attention. I'll just start off. I want to first thank all of you. It's been a few years since we've been here in person, but over the last couple of years, at least for the Park Service, the role that you have provided in making sure that we provided access to our visitors in national parks and provided those guiding and outfitting experiences has been critical. You, I am sure, have all, when we had a lot of our front country operations down, we are seeing this big influx of interest in getting in the outdoors, and you guys provided a really critical role for us, and we really appreciate all the flexibilities that you guys took into account as we were dealing with, COVID open parks, closed parks, masks parks, how do you put a mask on when you're on a raft, those sorts of things. And we know that you were really helpful in trying to work through all of that. So thank you very much for all that you've done around that. The innovation and flexibility that we saw was terrific. As we're kind of trying to get back to normal, I just wanted to chat about a few particular topics. I'll start by saying that for the Park Service, during COVID, it was really important for us to kind of slow down where we were, particularly on our concession contracts. And I should say I manage a program that has 3 types of authorizations within the Park Service that if those are not familiar with it. The first are concession contracts, and they're kind of our big contracts, 10-year term. We issue what we call prospectuses, which are bid packages that everybody bids on and compete openly for. The second are commercial use authorizations, kind of baby things, kind of similar to the special park use permits in the Forest Service. We've got about 6,000 of those, so quite a few more of those. I also manage that part, and then the last are leases, which are facility leases, where we lease for a number of properties. So on the concession contract side, during COVID, we really slowed that process down. We were really concerned about making sure we were issuing prospectuses where we knew what the financial opportunity was going to look like, and COVID really kind of upset that. And so one of the things you're seeing, and you may have comments on, is we're letting a lot more contracts now. We've kind of opened the gates again. So quite a bit of the work that we've been doing recently is kind of dusting off all of those prospectus documents that might have been kind of turned off in 2020, kind of getting them re-energized and getting them out on the street. So that's one of the things that we're working on. Second, what I'll talk very briefly about is an online CUA system, and then just a couple other initiatives that are going on. Kind of starting off, we're in the midst of a number of kind of regulatory activity. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's great.
Aaron, if you really want to click it, you can. Yeah, the forward button was pretty easy. They taught us that. That was like first day when we get into the main interior building. They teach you how to push that forward button. So there's actually a lot going on from a regulatory and legislative perspective. I know there's going to be a legislation session tomorrow, which I encourage you to go to. I think John Simon is giving. But just a couple points on some of the legislation and work that's happening that's directly related to those concession contracts and CUAs. The first is the Great American Outdoors Act. Many of you may be familiar with the fact that back in 2020, the Park Service got an opportunity to get a bunch of new funding, about $12 billion worth of funding. And we're using that funding to do a bunch of projects, starting in 22, working through 25, I believe. We're hoping that maybe we even get it reauthorized at some point in time. And you may be asking, well, what does that mean for our guide and outfitter operations? And I think it's twofold. One is there's a lot of infrastructure work that's getting done. That means new roads, new bridges, new wastewater treatment systems, and all of those things, although predominantly in the front country, provide better access to our visitors and ultimately may impact you as you're trying to get your clients out to where you want to go in the back country. And so we ask, as we're doing this and you're seeing road closures and that sort of stuff, to just be patient. This is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to do a bunch of rehab on facilities, and we know that it's going to impact parks as we get those done. Just kind of keep in touch with your points of contact in parks so you understand what those are, and then be patient as we try to work through those things. The second one is the America Outdoors Recreation Act of maybe 2022. I'm not quite sure. We're running out of time. The Park Service is a piece of that. We're referenced in there in regards to certain activities. It really focuses a lot more on other federal agencies. You may hear a little bit more about that. We don't know all that's happening. I think it's still in various markup forms. But there are a couple pieces that could potentially impact our CUA program in particular. I think one of them is we currently do what we call an acknowledgement of risk. Many of you, I'm sure, are quite familiar with it because we've had heated conversations about why the Park Service requires that in prior America Outdoors conferences. There may be a requirement that requires us congressionally to move over to waivers of liability. And if that happens, we will certainly take the cue from Congress and do what we're supposed to do. The second one is a joint permitting exercise that could potentially occur, particularly when there's crossover from one federal agency property to another. And so those are the two primary things that would impact our programs that we're aware of. And we are just kind of waiting to see what that looks like. The agencies are provided the opportunity to provide input as these rulemakings or as these legislations occur, which we've been doing to try to make sure that we're getting good legislation coming out of it. On the regulations side, we have statutes, and then we're required to issue regulations or decide to issue regulations to manage, and those are issued at the Park Service level. We've got a couple of things going on. The first one is commercial use authorizations. So commercial use authorizations were authorized under a law that was passed in 1998, the Concessions Management Improvement Act. There's a small section in there on CUAs. And we've issued regulations on concession contracts, but we never issued any on CUAs. And so we're taking this opportunity to issue those regulations. I will say that there's really no surprises that we anticipate in those CUA regs. So if someone's saying, oh my God, they're issuing regulations, this is going to be a real challenge for us, all we're doing is incorporating all the policy and procedures that we've been using for CUAs in times past under the statutory authority. So we don't anticipate it to be a big issue. We anticipate probably getting those rules out for public comment maybe the middle of like July, August of '23. And there'll be at least a 60-day public comment period. Everybody gets a chance to comment on them. We take those comments back and respond to them. But again, we don't really anticipate anything significant in terms of different new regulatory schemes or anything like that. We've been working for a few years now on an updated concession rule. The rule actually went as far as to almost be published under the last administration, and then administrations, when they change over, they have the opportunity to pull back rules. That occurred, and we've been working with the administration since then to rework the rule. One of the requirements that was in there that was a concern to many CUA holder or to concessioners, guide and outfitters was our ability to require somebody to hold a contract for 2 years before a sale and transfer. I think I can say, even though the final rule is not out, that we got significant comments on that, and that will likely not be in the final rule. The last one is this thing called the Visitor Experience Improvement Authority. And this is really easy. It doesn't apply to guide and outfitters, so you don't really have to worry about that. But this has provided the Park Service an opportunity to use new contract vehicles, particularly for front country operations like resort, the lodging, food and beverage, and retail stuff. A couple other kind of digging down a little further administrative priorities. So first one is the federal minimum wage, and I know many of you had concerns about that. There was a per court order, we've been enjoined not to enforce that. So if it was in any CUA or in any concession contract as a requirement, the Park Service has stood down on that. We're not enforcing it. And for all new contracts or CUAs moving forward, until we're told otherwise, those requirements are not going in. So right now, no impact on the federal minimum wage. Executive Order 14057 is something that deals with climate change and electric vehicles and a whole bunch of other stuff. And Secretarial Order 3407 is a plastics reduction program for specifically the Department of Interior. I bring this up because ultimately some of this may have touch points to concessioners and CUAs that are guide and outfitters. To be frank, there are no plans in place yet on exactly what any of this looks like. We have goals that we have to meet under the Secretarial Order and the Executive Order. For example, I think it's by 2035, our fleet needs to be electric. By 2032, we have to have eliminated plastics in parks or have a program to make sure we're getting 100% recycling. We don't have any specifics on that, but we will appreciate any input that the guide and outfitter community has on any of those sorts of things. How can we reduce our global warming gas emissions? How can we reduce our greenhouse gas footprint? How can we get more electric vehicles into parks? How can we reduce plastics and waste? So we don't have anything to really share because it's brand new stuff for us. We want to hear from you, and we'll definitely be engaging with America Outdoors and the front country operations to make sure that we understand what would work and not work. This is kind of a long-term process. We are not interested in getting whipsawed from administration to administration on ideas that get shut down by the next administration. And then commercial filming and still photography, I don't know anything about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I know it's an issue. There's price fee bar, and maybe John can speak more intelligently about that tomorrow. Just a couple other final things. The America Beautiful, the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation, you're probably all familiar that this was stood up by the most recent administration. The Park Service is currently the chair. But they are just standing themselves up, and there's really not much to talk about. Again, the interest there is equity, getting diversity into parks, making sure we're providing good access, but there's really nothing really to share yet on what that council will do and what its outcomes will have. The National Strategy for Hunger and Nutrition and Health, so the White House actually held a big conference and talked a lot about trying to get folks out into parks, and so we have a Healthy Parks, Healthy People program that you all play a really substantial part in. So there's this tenuous connection to this administrative priority on getting people healthy and getting them in the outdoors, which we really appreciate your help on, but really nothing specific that's going to, that was targeted in that plan that was referencing guide and outfitters particularly. Just reference the fact that you guys are part of the solution for us, and we take credit for all that you do for our visitors. And then the last thing I'll mention, most of you are probably aware we have a secretary who is Native American. We have a director who's Native American, and there's definitely an administrative priority Just yesterday, the president was at the Main Interior Building speaking to Council on Tribes. I'm not sure I got exactly what the group was, but it's this huge group. We were told to stay home because it was such a large activity. There is definitely an interest in looking at how to make connections to tribes, both in terms of employing tribal members, tribal businesses, and just making those interpretive connections and cultural connections to tribes. And so we appreciate, I don't have a lot to share on that specifically. There's no specific agenda item that the director has given us in terms of how to go about doing that. All you can do to help us meet those objectives too would be really helpful. We are updating our commercial services guide section on commercial use authorizations. Again, no big surprises there. It's just institutionalizing all the guidance that we have in other places. And then the last thing is we are putting together a CUA online permitting and reporting system. And it actually launched today. And it's currently being beta tested with the CUA holders at Glacier Bay and Denali in Alaska. That beta test will go on for this season, and then by next year we'll reach out, have public comment period on how it's working, provide information on the beta test, and then hopefully get that online system ready and operating next season. So by the 24 season, anybody that is a CUA will actually be able to go online and do it as opposed to the paper process. And we think it's going to be way faster, way easier, way quicker, both for the Park Service and for you all as operators. Until you try to hit the forward button, then the forward button doesn't work. So that's it for me. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, I think was the next to go. But I look forward to any questions and the ability to stay after while somebody brings beer.
We'll hold our questions until the end of these three presentations.
All right, I can't top that. And so thanks, Kurt, and well done. I guess probably important for me to say ditto on some of the high-level stuff, but really big thanks for the outfitter and guides' work during COVID and continuing with those great practices that you all are doing. So bravo to that. And many of his comments on EOs and SOs and high-level priorities are very much the same within the Department of Interior family. As you all know, probably where we part ways is with CUAs, we use special recreation permits, and we have our other mechanisms under our policy. So again, greetings and salutations. Great to be here with you. This is my first time at this conference, and I'm particularly excited. 18 hours ago, I was on a snowmobile at 10,000 feet, and I got to give full credit to Aaron for luring me out here. He persuaded me. He's very persuasive, and so are my colleagues here. So I didn't want to be the one that wasn't present. So we did come down off the mountain. So glad to be here with you all. I'm going to have you do the slides for BLM can't handle 2 arrow buttons. I definitely messed it up. So just a couple words. Unfortunately, I'll put up a picture of Casey Craven next. He's our actual permit and fee program manager. But you got me because he's working on our rec.gov contract. And BLM's a little bit smaller agency, and so we wear a bunch of hats. And so he's got to do rec.gov and permits and fees. And so you got me, and I apologize. Hopefully there's a few upsides to that. I guess we also have travel tourism in our house, transportation, accessibility. I'll say it, yes, e-bikes. If anybody wants to corner me on e-bikes, please don't. Just kidding. I know we can't avoid it, and we're not avoiding it. It's an important and a great tool and a challenging, conflict as well with different user groups. So there's, let's hit the next one, Casey. This is the gentleman on our team. We have several that work with permits and fees, but he's really been moving. You guys work with him regularly, right, on this program? And so he's the guy to go to really give all the answers. But he's primed me up and briefed me, and I'm going to do my best for you all. So he's, like I said, in Washington, D.C. We'll hit the next one. I did want to hit our Bureau priorities. We have clean energy, of course, is a big thing, and BLM has a lot to do with energy. Restoration and conservation are traveling together quite closely, and our recreation program is tying across the headquarters lines to make sure we're staying connected to that. And of course, rebuilding the agency is a big deal, and I'm glad to say that we're actually doing quite well. I came into this division of Recreation Visitor Services 2 years ago when we had probably 8 vacancies, and now we're fully staffed and firing all cylinders. Got got a lot of enthusiasm. Everybody's excited about the administration's priorities. I think we're doing well, and the director has a lot more work to do. She's really excited about rebuilding our agency. And then lastly, Recreation for All is a big priority for our director. Excited to have a director championing recreation. So great times in the BLM. I would be remiss if I didn't mention EO 13985 executive order. It does apply to all of our agencies. And I know I've partnered with some of Kurt's and Benjamin's other colleagues on this, and so it's a big deal for us. We have equity action plans, and we're trying to, I know that the BLM could do a lot better to connect with underserved communities, urban communities, and help build that culture of the outdoors and have those opportunities be seen by all, so that people see the public lands as a place for them to go and have a great time. And what can we do to build infrastructure to invite that? So we're definitely working on that. Definitely focus on youth as well. I've got some stats for you. I'll go quick because I like questions and answers, and I think you all do too. Just, again, a lot of acres that the BLM manages. You see our urban connections there. The visits are continuing to climb. I got a detailed visitation chart coming up. Developed rec sites. Permit increases are edging up from 4,000 to 5,000, and we've got really big volunteer contributions, as do most of our agencies. Our top 5 recreation states are California, Utah, Colorado, Oregon, and Nevada. Oh, no, I'm so sorry about that. The next one is our visitation. We never had a COVID pause. A lot of people poured onto BLM lands during COVID. You know, a lot of parks were closed and other places, and so BLM was discovered by more people, and that's great. And I'm pleased to see that we actually didn't grow another 10%. You know, we didn't need another 10%. It's really nice that we went from 80 to 81 million last year. And but we have been discovered by more people. We've been shared on social media. You guys know the drill, and you're seeing more people out there, I'm sure, on BLM managed lands. And so these numbers tell the story. And so we're definitely intending to meet that as best we can and help harden our front country sites and manage our back country sites so those values that you all appreciate and your customers appreciate are maintained. Again, just some more stats of top recreational activities, non-motorized travel, scenic enjoyment, camping, OHV. I would say another slide I don't have here is 80% of the clicks on blm.gov were recreation-based. It was camping, maps, you know, and there was a little bit of other things people were looking for, but definitely I think BLM is emerging as a recreation agency, and I think you're going to see a rec strategy come out. We're a little bit trailing behind the Forest Service's rec strategy, but I believe our director should hopefully be announcing her vision for BLM Recreation and reaching out to you all on what would you like to see in BLM Recreation. Next slide. So these are the topics I'm going to hit really quickly. Raptors, expecting applause here. This is BLM's, let's see, recreation and permit tracking, online reporting, cradle to grave, e-permitting. We're really excited about that. Dang, Kurt.
Well,
we didn't get it, bro.
I mean, he's definitely got a cooler name for it.
Right,
Raptor, man.
right. I actually would ask if anyone in the room has had any experience with Raptor. I definitely am interested in your experience and taking that in because we are driving forward very seriously on full cradle-to-grave e-permitting. We'll talk more about that. Map land and streamlining, I'll talk about. Again, partner with Forest Service and the Park Service and many other agencies on map land. Infrastructure funding, touch on that. This is from BLM perspective. And then this closure restrictions, proposed rulemaking. Next slide, thank you. So this is Raptor. Just wanted to hit a few high points. We have issued 65 permits to date. 10 offices are in the system, 17 are training. We do have 120 to go, but we expect to get there by 2025. We just needed a beachhead in every state. You know, we're organized by states, and once we have those beachheads established, they can learn from each other and call each other up and learn how the systems work. But we are still building out the back end, the phase 2, post-use reporting, annual validation requirements, permit renewals. So the first phase was just getting a permit issued. Now we're building the whole package, so there's no paper, and we're excited about that. One more slide on Raptor. This is the blue states were the early adopters. The green green units are this phase, and then of course you can see we pretty much have a beachhead in every state, and so we'll keep on expanding that. Next slide is about Mapland and related. There's so many interlocked things. I hope it gives you some encouragement for the federal government. These things actually do kind of dovetail together. We have the Mapland Act, which was signed in May. We have the Dingle Act, which was signed the year or two before 2019. And these things are coalescing with the Land and Water Conservation Fund in a very powerful way. The good news is, again, it's hard, not often we get to report being ahead of the game, but we started 2 years ago digitizing our easements. So the public, your customers, we all could find our access to public lands. It was bought and paid for and legal, but it wasn't available digitally. Mapland tells us to do it. We were already on the way and really excited to be partnered with our other agencies on that. We also are scoring our Land and Water Conservation Fund projects and giving them bonus points if they're on the Dingle Act Priority Access List. I don't know if any of you contributed, but we had 6,000 nominations about public lands that have access problems. 715 made it to our list. And so if that parcel's on the list and a piece gets nominated that would access that parcel, boom, it gets more conservation points. So these things are actually working together in a great way. Happy to visit with you after about that as well. FICOR, Kurt already mentioned it. I won't belabor it. I think 2023 is going to be a great year for FICOR. I think we'll see Director Sams and all the principals involved coming out on FICOR, and there's a lot of good things going there. I was connected to the previous FICOR, and they initiated rec.gov, another great work, and so I think there's a lot of great things, and we're definitely going to be an opportunity to hear from you on what you'd like to see the interagency resolve and fix, as I know you all are plugged into those topics. So it's very exciting. The next one is our infrastructure. We had, I would say, a modest amount of money through the bipartisan infrastructure law, but officially known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I think both titles apply. They're the same law. And we got $2.4 million in '22. We hope to get more this year. And with that small amount, we put 31 projects on the ground: cabins, interp sites, shorelines. I think there's at least one boat ramp in there for some of you to enjoy and use. But we're excited about '23. As I think someone said, it's a great time for recreation. We're excited to see what it provides. Here's just one little site that they were all ready to go. We always ask the field to be ready with projects if we get money, and so this is in Utah, just a couple group use sites that are now available in Utah. Next slide. Let's see. We have, this is the last item, is the BLM announced in the spring, put on its list that we might propose some rulemaking for closures and restrictions. This may not apply to many of you, but if your permit needs an area exclusively to protect the public, provide safety, I know some of the permits I've been involved with, like Bonneville Salt Flats races or some of those things, you need to exclude the public. And so we'd like to go into rulemaking and propose rules that would make it easier, more like the Forest Service actually. We'd like to copy their approach because we've actually had some permits that could have used a closure restriction, but our process was so cumbersome that they just rolled forward without it. Nobody needs that liability or risk, and so we're excited to do this rulemaking, hopefully. But I wouldn't expect anything until early summer. We hope to come out with a notice of proposed rulemaking if it weathers the storm. So with that, I think we're ready to turn it over. Is it the next slide? See where we're at. Yep, thank you. Ben. Go Raptor.
I'm gonna take care of this. Yeah. All right. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Ben Johnson, and I am the National Recreation Special Uses Program Manager for the Forest Service, which is a super long job title. But I work underneath the Director of Recreation in our Washington, D.C. headquarters. Although, fortunately, I get to do it from Bellingham, Washington, which is much better than D.C. in my opinion. So today I want to give you just a little update on the Recreation Special Uses Program for the Forest Service. Little bit of an agenda. There are a couple of things, though, that I want to begin with that are not maybe specifically permit related, but I think are still good things to throw out there. So first, our new recreation strategy initiative for the agency, our Agency Equity Action Plan, which was mentioned earlier. Some updates on our hiring efforts, so like the people you're actually talking to and interacting with, or wish you were talking to and interacting with in our local offices, and then we'll get into some policy updates. So, much like the BLM, we have some fun visitation numbers over the last 20 years or so. So right now, we're at about 168 million people visiting Forest Service lands annually. Certainly got a bump during COVID, like we all experienced. And kind of due to that, it's really made us think about the way we're managing our recreation program, both historically and into the future. And that has kind of got us looking about how to reimagine recreation, which is sort of the trade slogan for our new national recreation strategy. And y'all experience this day to day when you're out on Forest Service lands and you're at our rec sites. But there's a lot of things we've learned recently in the last couple of years, especially with the outdoor recreation industry, I guess sort of consciously blowing up and expanding, right? Now that we know how the GDP of all the work that y'all do influences the national economy, it's become more popular, bigger and bigger, and more high profile. And then of course, COVID, getting more people outside, raised the profile as well. So when you think about Forest Service recreation, it's that connection to the public, it's an economic driver, it makes the foundation of a lot of communities. But at the same time, I've experienced it, y'all have experienced it. There's certainly some issues with our recreation program. Our infrastructure is kind of dilapidated, so to speak, in some places. We have a pretty limited recreation workforce out there on the landscape. There are fewer people outside at our rec sites or issuing permits, and a lot of our systems are designed for that old way of doing business. So what we're trying to do is re-engage, reinvest, and reinvent. And so over the next few months, culminating at the end of this coming calendar year, we're putting together a new national strategy. Fortunately, I am not the point person to put that big effort together, but I wanted to bring it up today because there's going to be an opportunity for all of y'all to be engaged in that strategy. So I believe the timeline is sometime this spring. There are going to be sort of external engagements, workshop type things to get you and other members of the public feedback and input into what this thing should look like. So I think it's pretty exciting. It's long overdue in my opinion, and hopefully will help out with a lot of our stuff. All right, so now more specific to permitting. So I manage the Recreation Special Uses Program. So that is all of the recreation permit types except for ski areas. They have their own special person because ski areas are special. And then, and I don't do commercial filming, which is also wonderful. And so I get kind of the fun things, I think. But as mentioned with some of the executive orders that have come out from the administration, one has called for every agency to make an equity action plan. And recreation special uses is actually called out as one of the 10 emphasis areas in that plan, which is pretty exciting in my opinion because it's allowing us to do some pretty cool things that we otherwise may not have had access to. So the first thing is, like Park Service and BLM, we've restarted the development of our online application platform. We had an effort to do this that we piloted on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie about 4 years ago, and then it sort of slowly slid into the land of mothballs. And so we're dusting it off and getting a lot of support from the department to kick that off again. Additionally, we're collaborating with there's a whole research branch of the Forest Service, happens to be the biggest research organization in the world, which I didn't know until I started working for the Forest Service. But so we've started collaborating with them to try and figure out in a more sort of systematic, researchy way, what are those barriers to y'all getting permits, right? So looking at our systems, looking at the way we do education about the permitting process, et cetera, we're trying to lean on them as sort of outside experts to help us out. And then additionally, something we just now are starting in this new calendar year is trying to figure out new ways to do workshops and educational sessions for you and people like you that want permits or have permits, right? Like it's complicated, sometimes more so than it needs to be process. And so wanting to figure out ways to better educate the public, especially those folks who don't even realize they need a permit, right? And so trying to get those audiences on board with the process and how it works. So national hiring. So the agency has been doing a tremendous amount of hiring across all sorts of program areas, but recreation is included in that. And so the last number I heard is in the last about 4 or 5 months, we've hired approximately 1,000 new recreation positions. And this is so everywhere from the local ranger district all the way up to the Washington office. And those folks are being onboarded into their new jobs in the next couple of months. And a lot of those folks, about 120 of them, I believe, are brand new permit administrators. So people who are going to be working on forests in permitting so that they can answer the phones, they can issue the permits, and be there as a resource. So that's pretty exciting and is certainly a step in the right direction. As you know, our recreation staff has just sort of been gradually declining for like 30 years. And so this starts getting us back on the right foot with that. All right, so last slide, and then we can get into Q&A. So policy updates. Sadly, this policy update is somewhat similar to the policy update I shared with some of you like the last time I was at this conference, which was pre-COVID. But over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been working internally on what we call our directives. So this is like just the policy that manages the whole permitting process. In trying to make updates. And so we've been focused on concession campgrounds, so our campground operators, outfitters and guides, and then recreation events, which includes things like vending and activities like that. And so we are right at the sort of the final stage before we can put those out for public comment. And so sometime in this next calendar year, really want to get y'all's inputs on those updates through the notice and comment process. So we can hear the feedback, y'all's lived experience of having permits, so we can make sure those tweaks are appropriate and help everybody. I will say concession campgrounds and recreation events, that's brand new policy. So there's no current existing policy loosely governing those permit types. So it's pretty exciting to finally get some actual guidance out there for those programs because they're pretty big. I think with that, and especially since we only have 20 minutes left, let's Q&A. So I'll hand it over to Aaron. That's my email if you ever want to.
Aaron, I noticed that, and we didn't coordinate our presentations, but it sounds like you guys aren't going to be able to do any actual work this summer because you're going to be responding to new permitting systems, regulations, directive orders, et cetera. So thanks for all that.
Any multi-agency operators better hire extra people to interface with the public agencies, indeed. Thank you, guys. That was an incredible speed run through through all 3 of your agencies. We do indeed have 20 minutes. So what I'd like to do is we've got 3 mics here, and I'll snag one of those, and I'll just run a mic around because, again, like, you know, for the post show, it would be great to be able to capture your questions and the answers for people who might be coming back to watch this later. This particular workshop is going to be made available to the public. That's like, those are the rules. We don't own this content in the same way we own some of the content that's being produced over the last few days here. So, but we still want to capture this conversation as fully as we can. So go ahead and raise your hand. I'll go ahead and grab some mics. We can probably even flip through to a particular slide if you need to, and we'll let you guys answer questions as needed. Thanks.
Okay, so quick question. I didn't know that USDA actually issued use permits, but I'm a little confused. So we just bought a campground, but the land we owned is, I think, managed by the Department of Defense. Is that normal? It's like a wildlife management area. Is that something that also falls under USDA? Because we want to put mountain biking trails into those areas, but it seemed like Army Corps is going to issue our permit. Is that correct?
Army Corps, yeah. I certainly don't know the specifics, but Army Corps does issue permits for campground operations, things like that. So that could be what it is.
I was recording this. So it just depends on the area that you're in, the agency, because I know where BLM is, right? That's pretty cut and dried. It's all out west. But for USDA, how do we know where you're the ones issuing permits versus?
So it'd be if you're on a national forest.
Oh,
for
Okay, so
USDA.
it's also national forest as well. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. I just didn't understand.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Okay, great. Thank you. That was very informative. I have two questions. The first one has to do with the perceptions and reality of tourism and outdoor recreation in the United States. This is coming to a significant crossroads right now, and I have a question for the guys on the panel. The Department of Commerce rolled out in mid-2022 a new national travel and tourism strategy. This is, and I participated pretty actively in this as a nonprofit contributor. There are some exciting elements in this as it relates to travel and tourism, and by the way, outdoor recreation is by and large included in that, with some exceptions. There's a significant emphasis on stewardship and inclusivity in this. My question then comes is, how do you feel the significant recreation elements from each of the agencies which are being developed, and you obviously have very strict regulations around them, do you see opportunities for us to actually broaden the discussion and maybe break down some of the government agency silos between the federal land and water management agencies and, in this case, the Department of Commerce, which is significant. Bob Ratcliffe, who is from National Park Service, and his good friend, worked with him for years, and fortunately, he will be the first agency lead for the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation. So, you know, kind of open for Kurt, Kevin, and Ben. Any thoughts you have in terms of, given the sort of greater aperture that the Biden administration is providing to seeing more interagency cooperation, and the fact that the Biden administration reinstated FICOR, which the Trump administration killed, which was really unfortunate for us. Thoughts, gentlemen, in terms of how we can really recognize, especially when we look at tour operators, gateway communities, they don't necessarily differentiate outdoor recreationists with tourists, if you will. I mean, they're both coming, they're visiting, they're using services, et cetera. So just some thoughts on that. And then I had a specific question about Park Service, but I'll maybe ask that later.
I think, this is working, right? I think FICOR is a great piece to this whole puzzle. Certainly, there's interactions with commerce, and there were, so we had Park Service folks and other federal agency folks inputting on that tourism program. We have a tourism program manager in the Park Service, Donnie Ledbetter, who participates quite a bit on that and tries to make those connections. He works in Bob Radcliffe's shop, and so they talk on a regular basis. I think there's been, this administration has done a really good job of trying to set those sorts of priorities and recognize that it doesn't really matter what agency, they want to see it throughout all the agencies. I think FICOR is an example of that. So to the extent that we're looking to gateway communities, we also recognize that's a huge piece to the puzzle, making sure we're drawing in what's happening in a gateway community, how can we address the presidential priorities in not only directly in the park units, but also in the associated gateway communities. Where can we draw from the businesses that are in the community, from the ethnic diversity that's in the community? So I don't have anything specific. I think it's just there's a strong recognition that that has to happen and it can't be siloed. And I think FICOR is a good example of how they're trying to work to get around that silo.
Yeah, I'll just add for info. So we have a tourism program manager, Toby Bloom, who is part of the strategy effort as well. So she's been helping those connections.
If I might take advantage and Kurt, come back to you at National Park Service, because something that is brewing right now in the Park Service specifically, and I'm directly involved in this, working with Bob Radcliffe and Donnie Ledbetter, is the Park Service is moving to align all the outdoor recreation professionals and travel and tourism. And one of the things that we are talking about with Park Service, particularly Donnie and Bob in that office, is how to develop a better, more integrated, and more progressive kind of training program. Training both of National Park Service employees across the rec and tourism spectrum, which would include concessionaires, et cetera, but also the general public and users of the Park Service land. So I just wanted to mention that because there are some possibilities that it would have an impact on anybody in the room who's operating on national park property. In a positive way, I believe, but yeah, so
Yeah.
again, Kurt.
I think that's great. I will say that you all play a really important role, and it's very interesting because sometimes, to your point, there can be disconnects between the commercial activity in the park, and Bob is a former kayak guide. He has a background in it, so he makes those connections. But it's not always that we have conversations directly with Bob and with Donnie. And so you, as the business community that are providing those services, ensuring that we're at the table at those conversations by asking the question, hey, is Kurt there or somebody from the commercial services program having these conversations could be really helpful in making those connections. We do a really good job. I'm good friends. Donnie actually worked for me for a number of years, so I know him well. But we sometimes miss out on that. So the conversation might not be happening, and we might not be at the same conferences that the recreation folks are at, which is one of the reasons we really like to come here because we can make those connections. So I think you all can help by saying, hey, did you ask the commercial services program about this? Or vice versa, have you asked the rec program about it?
Can you hear me? Okay. This has to do with a CUA reapplication in the national parks and the waivers. Because previously my waivers, I have them sign a release of liability, but now it seems to me the way this reads that I can only have them sign an acknowledgement of risk. As what it currently says, the holder is not permitted to require clients sign a waiver of liability statement or form, blah, blah. The holder is permitted to request or require a form acknowledging the risk. So now I'm not allowed to have them sign a release of liability, only an acknowledgement of risk.
Hi. Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier that this has been a topic of conversation before. The Park Service has had a policy for as long as I've been in the Park Service, which is now going on 20 years, where we didn't allow waivers of liability. If there were waivers of liability that were being issued, it was probably because the park was unaware that that prohibition existed. So our position is that we shouldn't be, that the concept of waiving liability means that in some manner or another we're saying that we're not responsible. We're waiving the liability. And so as a matter of policy, historically, and in conversations to include finger wagging from Congress people, that some of you may have been in the room when Senator Udall finger wagged me. We have not allowed that, and we will continue to not until potentially the Outdoor Rec Act actually mandates that we do that. We recognize that there are impacts from that it can impact your insurance requirements in terms of the availability and cost of insurance, but from a policy perspective, which is levels above me, that's where we've been for some time. And if there's disparity, it's likely because our CUA program in particular is managed at the park level. And while we provide plenty of training and outreach to our managers at the park, some of them don't recognize all of the requirements and they're getting caught up on it. Part of that, for example, is that we just had the first ever in-person commercial use authorization training program several months ago. And in that training, they talked about all the policy and procedure, and so there are a lot of people that are kind of coming on board to some of the requirements they might not have been used to before. So that would be the reason for any change that's occurring. Great question. Can I ask where you're from?
Big Bend National Park.
Big Bend, great, great, thanks.
My next question is probably for Ben. So in participating in a couple of new permit opportunities or trying to get permits fixed, one of the processes that seems to occur is going out to public comment. And one of the trends that's occurring, especially with the redistribution of America, so you know a lot of people are leaving urban areas, going to some of the more desired places, and there's starting to become a fairly material provincialism that occurs. So as soon as they move to an area, they kind of want to shut the door and make sure nobody else can come. And so when you're looking at permits, and this is all federal land stuff, and you're saying, okay, we want to expand opportunities for recreation on, in this case, Forest Service land, but we're going to go out to the general public locally and ask them what they think, and their answer is, we don't want any more visitors, we don't want people on our land because there's too many people already. And this is actually influencing decisions of the local decision makers because they're saying, well, they're the citizens, we have to listen to the citizens, it's part of our process. I think there's a real flaw in the system because this is national land, and having a local person have a say as to whether there can be something done on federal land that's supposed to benefit all Americans or not seems almost ass backwards to me. So I think from a policy or perspective, especially if we're trying to look at streamlining the scenario relative to getting permits to work as they're intended, there probably needs to be a dialogue amongst all the permit administrators across the agency and say, let's be careful on that mechanism. I get that we have to scope things and do everything, that's all part of EIS and everything else, I get that. But it shouldn't drive the bus, and in too many decisions I've seen decisions made by the Forest Service reversed because of the public outcry locally, because they didn't want to see all this additional growth and all these new people coming. That's just contrary, in my opinion, to what national policy is for public lands. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think you're talking about more the NEPA scoping process versus like public comment on rules, et cetera. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a very valid and good perspective. You know, we kind of in the NEPA process, we have to do scoping depending on the level of the action. So it's not something we can get away from, but I certainly hear your point.
You know, I think it's interesting too, and again, it gets to what you can do as an industry group and also as individual businesses. To you know, the public scoping process is not limited to the local community, and so when we do rulemaking, we get small public community comments, and then we get larger comments from a more diverse population that has a different perspective than where the direct impact might be. And so, having your voice and being cognizant that you can provide that sort of input is really important too, so we're not getting just a jaded, it's only the NIMBY local that moved out there in the last 5 years or during COVID and now want to shut things down. So it's a great perspective.
I'm really not trying to avoid the answers, but these guys are doing a great job.
Any questions? All right.
One of our goals here is to continue to do a team building, community-based organization to try to drive good policy for outfitters and recreation as a whole. And so I have to applaud you for coming here and being with us and having FaceTime so that we can ask you these questions. And I also just want to point out, I'm seeing the trend come down through all the organizations on EO 13985, the Equity Inclusion Plan. And I really want to advocate for us, this group of outfitters, that we are leaning hard into this topic, and we would like to be an avid partner in that space and not to be excluded from that space through these issues that our other speakers are bringing up. So I'll just lobby you here for a minute that please, we will be able to comment, and everyone here is going to get together and we're going to write the best comments you've ever seen. And it is another argument for a strong America Outdoors as well, that we can have that voice. But since it is coming down, I just wanted to remind you, and I'll tell you this over a couple of beers, that we need to have recreation opportunities for this segment and outfitters need to be really included in that, because I think we are the vehicle to help those communities to get out there, you know. And also that it's been really impressive to see the sessions. I can't remember, Kurt, were you here last year?
I wasn't, I think we phoned it in, didn't we?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so it was just the sessions that we've been working on, this inclusivity, and this topic has been really impressive. In fact, there's several members here that have real success stories. So I encourage you to ask about those so you can see how we're already trying to lean into this subject. Thank you.
I was just going to jump in and say thank you very much for taking it the way you did and leaning into it, as you said. I think that this group, Outfitters, is a great opportunity to, again, build outdoor recreation into the culture of communities that is probably excited to receive it, you know, and you all can deliver it. And so I'm excited to see what you could do and combine with, I think you could perhaps do more in many cases than the federal government can do, right? We can help facilitate that, and I know that the administration and all the team members on our agencies is excited to do that. So we look forward to collaborative opportunities and expanding that, and I know the BLM probably is behind the power curve the most and has the most that it can do and should do. So be happy for you to corner me whenever and talk more about it. Thank you.
I'll just add real quickly, I think for the Forest Service, you see the recognition and commitment to engaging with y'all on that executive order and other things in that equity action plan. I mean, of the 10 things the agency's focusing on to promote that executive order, one of them is our recreation permitting program, which is all of you. So I think that, to me, is a sign that we're committed to including y'all.
Another continued plug in that, well, first I should say, he was on a snowmobile a couple days ago. He lives in Bellingham. I came from Washington. So the ability to actually come and hang out with all of you is like really good, because otherwise I'd be, you know, commuting in traffic back home from Washington, D.C. But we do have a challenge, and that is that we don't hear all that you're doing all the time. Particularly, I'm literally in Washington, D.C., and I'm always here to help, but I don't often hear, it's difficult, it's part of the reason why I like to come to places like this, to hear what you're actually doing. So anything that you can share individually or through industry associations like America Outdoors, we strongly recommend, because we want to hear what you're doing, because we know you're doing a lot. We just sometimes don't have the pulse of exactly how it's happening on the ground. So we encourage all of that conversation.
Super. We only have a couple minutes left. I get to ask one question. I have a lot, but I'll hold them for some of our individual one-on-ones. We've talked a fair bit about the FICOR, the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation. I engaged with the FICOR when it was stood up in the Obama administration. Pleased to see it stand back up. Interested to see the direction that it's going to go. You said Bob Ratcliffe is going to be engaged with that? Is that what you said? That's not the question. It's great to have Bob in there, because Bob's been involved both with the BLM for quite a while and with Forest and with Park Service for quite a while, and familiar with all agencies. So I think he's a great leader for that. I'm interested in how this community can effectively engage with the FICOR, because there's certainly other agencies, you know, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Tennessee Valley Authority possibly. I don't know all the agencies that are involved in it, but many are involved in special recreation permitting that in some capacity or another, some segment of our outfitters may be working with. So do you have any recommendations for how we can start to have a conversation with that group?
I'll take a quick stab at it. I'm the BLM representative to the working group for FICOR, Bob's peer, and so to answer your question, first of all, I think in 2023 you're going to see overt, intentional outreach asking for input. Certainly when FICOR was announced in July, there's been a lot of pop-ups, you know, a lot of ideas already coming our way. So it's possible that when you engage or when the outreach occurs in 2023, you may already see your issue there. You may have some nuance or some plus-up to add to it. But so I think there's definitely going to be intentional outreach to stakeholder groups and industry groups and private citizens and tribes, and so that's definitely coming. And then just on the organization, the principals of the group are our directors. And so then there's the worker bees like myself and Bob, and so we're the ones that get it done for our leaders, get it done for you. And so we're definitely excited to be part of that and see that going forward. But your opportunities are coming in the coming year. I think I'm hopeful to think January, February, you'll hear some things. You know, we're working on the commerce plan. We're doing all the behind-the-scenes work to put all these agencies together in an organized manner that you're going to like what you get out of it.
I think I read that the principals are meeting perhaps for the first time in December, maybe even, so very soon.
Yeah, I don't want to get out in front of any, press release type stuff or what have you, but the agencies are tying it all up, and so it's definitely moving forward in a good way.
Great. All right. Well, everyone, if you'd like to rewatch this session or any other sessions you missed, you can purchase the conference recordings at the registration desk. This one you can watch just on our website. Remember to fill out the session feedback survey in the session description of the Cvent Events app. If you need help downloading the app or finding the survey, you can take your phone to the registration desk for exhibit. The exhibit hall and bar are open until 6:30 p.m. The pool party kicks off at 7 p.m. Dress up. All right, our panelists are going to be staying here for a Q&A session for those who want to stick around. I think the way I'd like to do it is sort of have my presenters right be Department of Interior, presenters left be USDA. So let's have Park Service in the front, BLM in the back, Forest Service here. All right, for those of you who want to stay, not required.